Welcome to the Sense Kaleidoscope podcast, where Akshay and I, Vahini, attempt to change the narrative around autism and bust a couple of myths that surround the spectrum. Akshay?
Thank you. Thank you for that. Viney, taking it from the last episode where we spoke about cognitive regression, this time I think I want to move into social emotional regression. And I know while I'm saying the term, these terms are not something that is written or spoken about. So let's start with unpacking it.
Okay.
Social emotional regression, specifically, if you can help us unpack from the what it may feel or sound or look like from the ages of 7 to 14. What are the different parameters that we need to bear in mind when we're talking about social and emotional regression? Um, do you want to start with that?
So, I think when you talk of social regression or emotional regression, it's basically when the individual is not able to regulate or behave in a manner that is acceptable to the neurotypical world. And I think I say this often enough and through this podcast as well, that everything for the person who's neurodivergent, the standard is always, can I measure up to the neurotypical world? Or I have to adhere to rules or standards set by the neurotypical world, right? So when you're falling short of that, that means you're not up to the mark. Now, when you talk of autism as a disorder, you are talking of marked um, deficiencies in ability to socially communicate, socially regulate, and emotionally regulate as a consequence.
I want us to further break this down, and I think in the breaking down, it'll become obvious as to why I'm asking. So when I say socially, now, of course, the social rules are not as simple because culturally they shift, contextually they can shift, circumstantially they can shift. Um, isn't that one of the reasons why autism finds it very, very difficult to navigate that space?
I think it's easier today than it was a couple of years ago. I think the new generation doesn't greet with either a social smile or a hello or whatever it is, as we were instructed to do back in the day. Um, so I think it's a little easier. I think the world is slightly easier for the social world is slightly easier for the person on the spectrum today. Whereas otherwise, you had to make eye contact. You had to have a social smile. When someone says hello, how are you? You're supposed to say hello, how are you? You teach the child like a rule book, so that he or she doesn't feel out of place or is not looked upon differently or treated differently. So that's just the basic, like when you say social nuance or social behavior, the first thing is when you meet a person, what happens, right? So you're saying, hello, how are you? And you smile and say, hi, I'm fine, how are you? So that is taught.
Correct.
And that is internalized because it doesn't come naturally to them. Because they do not want to be with another individual. If I want to be with you, then I will make that extra effort to adhere to a certain compliance so that you will accept me in your environment or in your space. I don't want to be with you. I don't want to be with people. I want to be with myself. Why should I bother? So we put one rule. We say you start with something as funny as a positive reinforcement for that child spontaneously coming and saying, hello, how are you? Until it is internalized, until it becomes a learned behavior, right? That's why most kids, when they are younger and when they're taught to say hello, they might have a ulta wave because they see they see this as a hello. So they'll say hi like that, you know. So it's all learnt behavior, and we have to teach them
Because
that.
they're
looking at the
they're
palm.
looking at their palm, whereas we are showing our palm. So that's how that mirrors.
Yeah.
That's how it starts, because obviously there are a lot of social rules, like you said, in the format of greeting, um, whether I want to be with somebody or I don't want to be with somebody. Maybe in the younger years, of course, children want to be in their own bubble, which is why we see it more often over there. Eventually, as they become teenagers, I would like to be with you, but then maybe that my way of being with you doesn't necessarily mean that I have to greet you every time in that format.
Correct.
That is also one way of looking at it. I think moving from there, the idea of I would like to bring the idea of saying something that is not true, a rule that is very constantly taught to children with autism, because of course safety, ensuring that the child is able to communicate in a way so that we can protect the child and the child is not exposed to anything negative. But saying don't speak anything that is untrue, and then if you I mean, I have faced this many times with the students where they turn around and they say, okay, so Akshay, you are fat. It's a fact, right? And then suddenly you turn around and say, oh, no, 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 that's not acceptable. Can you see how complicated this becomes for the child? I mean, I'm one of the very few people who do not correct children when they actually speak the truth.
So when you talk about teaching a child to be honest, okay, you're basically trying to say that call out whatever it is, whatever is on your mind, let me know so that I can help you, so that I know where you are, and I'm building cognition, so on and so forth. While we're building cognition, you are also exposing the child to various situations, trying to not generalize but be, situation specific. This is how you conduct yourself in a movie theater. This is how you conduct yourself in an amusement park. This is how you conduct yourself in a family situation, so on and so forth. You have established ground rules. Now, very clearly, everybody knows that people on the spectrum have a literal way of thinking and speaking.
Correct.
Right? So when you're saying it's raining cats and dogs, they don't understand where the cat and dog came from.
Correct.
Okay? So when you're saying you have to say someone called you saying, okay, my teacher is fat. Okay? Now you are running an outfit which is dealing with people on the spectrum, and hence you will say, very good.
It's
He
okay.
has labeled it and I am fat, and so be it. Right? But then in a social situation,
No, sorry to interrupt, but even if I do want to correct it, or even if we do say that we're going to correct it, we correct it in a very in a casual manner. It is not done like I just put that child in a mainstream school where the child is in the middle of, let's say, 10, 15, 20, 30 children, and then calls the teacher fat. I'm sure you know what kind of a reaction would come across there.
so the child is not being appropriate, has has an abusive behavior, is just calling people names, can be anything. Say instead of just fat, like that child said hippo or elephant or whatever, then it becomes name calling and so on and so forth.
Correct.
And then there is, because of that, like there is some kind of reprimanding reaction
And
or
fear.
punishment. Then there is a peer conversation there saying this person does not know how to regulate himself or herself. We've done all the work for the cognition. We've done all the work saying this is how you conduct yourself emotionally. This is how you regulate your emotions when people bully you. All this has already been done. But that moment of truth, if there is nobody standing by that person when they are faced with this, where there is bullying, where there is peer, peer bashing, where there is some kind of reaction from the teacher or so on and so forth, then the individual starts wondering why. I was just stating a fact. I was just asked to be honest. Maybe honesty doesn't pay. Maybe I should not speak. So then suddenly, if the child or the individual turns around and says, maybe I should not say anything because that is what I'm learning from the environment. The environment is teaching me that if I feel something and if I say it, then I'm getting now. Obviously, at that point, there is some generalization that has happened, which is not right. Right? It is not that it is true that every time this individual voices anything that this individual is going to be bashed. But this experience has caused some trauma and hence going forward will not share anything.
Yes.
Because they are not sharing anything, every time there is some kind of emotional distress, the individual is suppressing it.
But Vaini, can this thing of communication being stopped consciously, because I think that it is coming from a space of consciousness for that child. The child is feeling ridiculed, humiliated, and hence says, let me not. I mean, when we have worked, we've seen most of our kids who have gone to mainstream schools come back, and then every time they're checking us, They write an answer, before that they're checking us. After they write the answer, they're checking us. Once they have said something, they're checking us. That thing I've seen so much. But can we also say that this is a cause of communication regression? Because this is regression, where the work has been done to get the child to communicate. And then over a period of time, we see that as they become teenagers, initially they report, "So I went to school, I did this, I did this." But we have seen when they come to 9, 10, 11, 12, they actually stop reporting. Isn't that regression as well?
Communication regression because of like peer observation. Yeah. My peers are not going and telling their parents everything or telling their teachers everything. So maybe through peer observation, maybe because of
Not giving it
trauma.
trouble so much.
Yeah, not getting it. And some trauma because someone made fun of you. Okay, the teacher didn't reprimand you, so you're not getting into trouble. So they just observe and say, okay, maybe this is because we are teaching them, learn from the neurotypical child. For you to fit in, you have to be like them. Yeah. So I have this conversation a lot with neurodiverse parents. And I will always say that, you are always trying to tell your child to fit into the neurotypical world. While the neurotypical parent is always saying, oh, you're so different. We celebrate your difference. You are unique in your own way, right? So this is always a conundrum. The neurodivergent will always try to fit into the neurotypical, while the neurotypical wants to celebrate uniqueness. So that's just the way it is. But coming back to emotional, social, and cognitive regression and the differences between it, cognitive, because of emotional and social distress, right? They might clam up, and there might be emotional and social regression, which can influence the cognitive regression.
How a neurotypical person can process emotional information is not how an autistic person processes emotional information.
That is correct. That is correct.
And having said that, there is this connection between the social interactions, what happens over there, what is processed over there, directly affecting the emotional landscape of that human being. Can we talk a little bit about that? Because I want us to go back into what that regression looks like. Now, why is established? Can you help us understand what it looks like?
So, like I said, whether it is useless or hippo or whatever it is, because social interaction and emotional interaction is learnt behavior for a person with autism, we are teaching that child in his or her formative years to be the kindest, nicest human being, right? Maybe you teach the child to be firm. I don't know whether we do that enough.
Can you
Okay.
explain firm? I'm sorry, I didn't understand that.
So you're trying to tell the child to be nice always. Tell
To
the
be
child to
kind,
be
yes.
kind always,
Mhm.
right? There is no room for, and we say, okay, the child with autism doesn't understand humor, so you kill that bit, right? So you're just going with kind, super empathetic. You're trying to teach the child how, it is socially acceptable to be in the most clinical, sanitized manner to say, hello, how are you? It might sound robotic, but it's still acceptable, better than just turning your face away, right? So you've started there. Then you've opened out the world of vulnerability. Good touch, bad touch. People can be rude. People can be a bully. People can be mean. How do you cope with it? That time also you're telling the child to walk away from the situation. You're not telling the child to head on fight and say, you too.
Do anything that can be termed as release, I guess?
I guess, but then that's where I'm saying firm, right? We are not equipping that child to fight for himself.
Would assertive be a better word?
Possibly.
Mhm.
Be firm, be assertive, say no is no. You are not teaching the child to say no ever, because you are worried where the child is going to say no to you. When you are the behavior therapist or the teacher, right? You don't want the child to say no to you. No, I do not want to do this. Oh, but can you do this instead? No, I don't want to do anything today. No, I can't work with that. So hence, I will give options that suits me as a behavior therapist, while I am trying to work with the child. So what I'm trying to say is, while we are working in such a sanitized, like, oh, this, you're trying to create this angelic child, for a better word, and then suddenly you want that person to, the world is not kind, right? The child is going to face trauma through either peers or parents or relatives or just society at large, just that the world is not as kind, and the child might face some trauma. Now, that trauma might impact your social and emotional regulation because of the fact that you have been taught that everything is beautiful and dandy.
Mm.
People are going to say, "Hi, good morning." Oh, hi, good morning. That's what I'm going to. But when I come down the stairs, I'm like, "Hi, good morning." And my father is in a bad mood and he's making coffee. He will go about it and I'll feel bad saying, "Oh, what's going on?" But I'll let it go as a neurotypical. As a neurodivergent, I'll feel bad and I'll keep it with me. As a neurotypical, if I did not want to keep it with me, Appa, everything's okay? Why didn't you say good morning to me? I will ask for it. Are we equipping our students to go that mile?
I think there are also other complications over here. Isn't it very interesting when you were talking about that? I was thinking about one of my students where he was largely in a regular school environment or a mainstream school environment for most of his life. And he's a very, very sensitive child and comes from a family where they follow the rules, they speak in a particular manner. So, again, a family that has very clear boundaries for communication and so on and so forth. Another thing with this child is also that his communication is not free flow. If he
It's
even
doctored or
experiences,
what?
yes, and also if he experiences something new in his life, like if he experiences pain, and suppose he hasn't experienced pain before in that part of the body, he would not be able to tell you. He would need some help to actually be able to communicate even something like that. So any new format of communication that would be required, it kind of like stuns him, he freezes, he does not know
Fair
what to
enough.
do. So over a period of time, through his experiences and from what I know, is where he, when these kind of things started happening, whether it was the bullying from the peers or it was the reprimanding from the teachers or it was the ignoring, even when, though I'm very, very certain it was done very subtly, I'm very certain about it, but even those subtle things brought him to a point where he broke down and then he could not continue in that environment anymore. And that is social emotional distress. I wouldn't want to say just regression. It's serious
No,
distress.
regression, it happens over a period in time.
Yes,
But
most of it
the-
is invisible, isn't it?
But most of it is triggered by some sort of trauma.
Correct.
Most of it is triggered by some sort of dissonance. Most of it, all of it is always triggered from the fact that you taught me about rules. I followed all the rules.
And things didn't go
And
as
things
per
didn't
plan.
go as per plan.
So, Vaini, we've done this talk in 2 episodes. So, I'm going to try and bring it together before I ask you the question that I think will kind of sum it up. Um, the last episode, we spoke about cognitive regression. We looked at examples where a child's language didn't have any meaning. This time, we have spoken about social emotional regression. And we have looked at various examples in this episode as well. Would you be able to very clearly define the difference between the two?
Cognitive regression very clearly is I'm not able to understand a certain concept and I'm not able to make sense of the world in a way where I can further learning of any kind, of making sense of the world. Whether it is academic ability, whether it is improving to understand how one navigates across the world in a neurotypical world, that is cognitive ability. Social and emotional ability is the ability to be able to manipulate the environment in such a way that you are able to regulate yourself to be able to kind of conform to what the neurotypical world defines as normal or defines as acceptable. So, to put it very simply, I might be able to understand that something is wrong because of a rule that you told me. The rule is a cognitive ability. To be able to follow rules is cognitive ability. When that rule is put into action, and if it fails, and I am not able to understand why it failed, and it, instead of going back to my cognitive senses and trying and analyzing why it failed, I let it impact me, and I am emotionally distressed, that time there is a, you know, emotional dissonance. Social dissonance is also similar, but it is largely not to do with the self, but to everybody around you, be it your peers, be it your parents, be it, anybody that you meet, how you conduct yourself in a social setting. So when the rule that you told me does not work, instead of going back and analyzing it, I just say that, okay, I will stop talking to anybody. I will be with myself. Emotional is, I will start hating everybody around me, or I will start hating myself and get into depression. And whenever that similar situation where I cannot understand what is happening, then I will get into an entire emotional spiral.
A cycle. Yeah. A cycle that is very difficult for them to break as well. And I think, so would it be okay to say that these are intelligences, isn't it? They're forms of intelligences. Like, I don't know, Howard Gardner talks about the different intelligences. One of them that he brought out, which nobody at that time was talking about, was kinesthetic intelligence. So if education is not able to do justice in all of these three areas, then we are looking at our children, teenagers, young adults going into isolation. We are looking at behaviors. We are looking at
Mental illness.
mental illnesses. So it is necessary, if I can say, that education will have to play a very strong role in defining these intelligences, no matter how complex it is, like we said about the social rules and so on and so forth, and the fact that it keeps changing. That's, I guess, that's just the lay of the land. We will still have to find a way to make this information accessible to our children in such a way that they can really absorb it and be able to implement it, so that they can truly kind of, be able to work with it, as opposed to
See,
feeling failed by it.
I think it's important to go back to the roots where you're saying trust and bonding. Um, you need to reinstill the fact at every stage of that child's life, saying that, this is what the rule is, but if it doesn't work, come back to me. Keep that avenue always open, so that when something goes awry, they come back to you. Now, if that door is somehow shut,
But
or
door is going to be closed, because if I believe completely what you have taught me and I go with that and then I fail, and you have not been able to identify symptoms in me of that failure for whatever reason, then that's when I shut down. Basically, there's a break of trust here.
yeah, but then from the very beginning, if I said, hey, Ryan, whatever happens, we are going to try this. If it doesn't work for you, come back to me. We have, I think, just as much as we grew in that journey of sensitivity in our earlier episodes of speaking about Ryan and how he regulated his emotions and how long the journey was, he also witnessed us trying a whole bunch of things, right? He didn't think that we had it easy either. He's witness to it, right? So as long as you keep that door open, and it's not possible possibly for an educator to kind of take onus of it all the time. I think the nurturer, the primary caregiver also has to be
The collaboration is
extremely,
important.
extremely observant, because that child might not stay with me the whole time, might go to various environments and may not have access to me all the time, might have access but might not think of me as the first point of, you know, first touch point. So it's important for whoever the primary person is at that point in time saying, hey, though we have established this bond and trust, and I think that this is the way to go. If there is any discrepancy, come back to me. Let's work on it together. And I think that if you are building cognition in parallel, this is something that can be avoided to a large extent.
I feel through this conversation, I want to leave the audience with some flags that they can look at. When a child is being quiet, masking is very common in the spectrum. Women do it more than men. It's one of the reasons why I very strongly believe that women don't get the diagnosis very easily. And just India culturally teaches women to mask beautifully in various circumstances. However, here in his case, just because he was quiet and just because he continued to function, As in, he did his homework, he did his classroom activities, he did everything that was expected out of him. He ate dinner, lunch, breakfast, he did all of the daily skills that were expected of him. Didn't mean that he was not slowly experiencing a regression within himself. What is it that nurturers can do to pay attention to these subtle signs, so that we don't wait till that breakdown happens? Because when the breakdown happened, there was no way for him to go back. He was affected physiologically, he was affected psychologically, and he just stopped. It came to a halt. He didn't want to go back into education. He didn't want to. He associated distress with all of that is necessary for him. So what kind of flags do you think we can put out there? How do we look at these subtle signs? Why do we have to wait for it to come to this point where it is a complete breakdown? What do we do?
I think parents of neurotypical individuals also go through this
Mhm.
because they're so busy with their lives. Life has become a lot more difficult, stressful, traffic, work, ailing parents, ailing in laws, so on and so forth. In addition to that, if you have a neurodivergent child, that's compounding this entire busy schedule that people have. Plus, today the child is exposed to a whole bunch of social media in general, the internet, YouTube, so on and so forth. All this said, back in the day, we used to talk about dinner table conversations, right? Do you check in with your child every now and then to find out what's going on? Do you have a meal together? Is there a sit down time together? Are you watching Netflix and then after that sit down to make popcorn together? And that time, do you have a conversation? I'm not talking. There is a difference between spending time with your child and engaging with your child, right? So it's important to engage. I don't care whether you spend 8 hours with your child. Shall spend all the time with your child? No. But do you know what will happen? Can you confidently say, if this situation happens, this is how my child will react? That's how well I know my child. And you need to know your child, at least a neurodivergent child, to that extent. So are you checking in? So what happened at school today? He might not tell you, right? But you'll know something is off.
We do have a system for this. You remember when we were working in SK, and then the kids would just not talk? I do
We
you
had
not
talk
do you not
time.
remember we brought in the talk time? I remember calling you up and saying, "Why anyway, sitting for lunch over here and nobody's talking around me.
Yeah, yeah.
I can't handle this." Like there, and we started some. Of course, we started with um, very straight ideas,
Structured.
structured conversations. What did you have for breakfast? What did you have for lunch? What did you have for dinner? Did you sleep well? And things like that. But then today, in sense, I see this conversation going.
And no, and a lot of things, it's interesting to see peer interaction with,
Yes,
oh, he listens to this kind of song, he watches this kind of
this is the
movie.
favorite
Yeah,
color.
yeah. So he knows more
This
about that
one was
person.
absent because they went here for this trip and this is what they did. I mean, I'm really happy we are in that place. But we started with saying, I still remember when you put a table, and then with one of the students, and we wanted him to report what was happening in his house. And it was critical to the modification work that we were doing, but we wanted him to report. And then we did the half an hour slots. What happened from 7 to 7:30? What happened from 7:30 to 8? And in that, it took a lot of time, but we got there. So even if there is a communication impairment, there are ways for us to build this, what you were talking about, the
I
engagement.
think more than communication, the thing is, when there is a communication impairment, I think from what I have seen is that the parent is more clued in.
Mm.
Okay. When there is no communication impairment or the degree is very small, they usually believe the child is okay. Okay.
Mm.
He is coping. He is fine in school.
Because he's doing
I
the
have
tasks.
not, yeah. And I have not seen any divergence from this. So it's fine. Okay. What is happening in the school, whether the child is falling in love with somebody, okay, whether the child is having some peer issue,
Mm.
right, may not report.
Will not report. We have seen that in our experience. It never comes out, and I feel that is the crux of the entire problem. There is no communication, hence I don't understand if the child is okay emotionally or not. That is the problem here, isn't it?
Flags are like being withdrawn, having any kind of new behaviors,
Mm.
any kind of new outbursts where you are not able to understand, like everything was fine until now, suddenly something's going on. Why is he watching so much TV suddenly? Why is he going on writing the same thing again and again? Why is he talking about the same thing over and over again? See, because if this goes unattended, most times they will start serving as first a rant, then they will get into a loop of self triggers, and it'll get into an obsessive place where it impairs functionality.
We also see an increase in OCDs, don't we? Very subtly, you can see an increase in OCD.
I'm saying any behavioral change, look out for it. Like if it is just sudden and if it's not purely hormonal, like we spoke about
Mhm.
in the last episode. But if you are seeing that just suddenly, there are various changes, then yeah, just check in with the child in whatever way you communicate with the child. Reach out to your special educator, reach out to whoever is around to try and form new strategies to bring that out. Because otherwise, unless you will not know how to take things forward. Like most people will say, how do you establish baseline? And during my assessments, I generally hope that I see the worst behavior
Mm.
because I know I have seen the worst. Now I know where to start.
Correct.
I'm not saying that, okay, torture that child to ensure that, you see it. But then I just hope that, through navigating the regular day itself, if the child is able to cope, then fine. But most often, I will see it. And I'm happy that I do because then I know where to start. So, similarly, unless I know what the problem is, how do I deal with it with my teenager? you know I can't approach it. No, you are talking about, you told me about boundaries. Now you want me to talk about my girlfriend problems. Now you want me to talk about my fantasies, and then you don't want me to have any fantasies. And I think like working with teens and young adults has really thrown up, apart from a lot of mental health issues and stuff like that, there are lots of taboos in society, in Indian society especially, I think across globally in any society. But the child is not, because you've taught the child to function in a certain way, be socially appropriate in a certain way. Don't say a person is fat. Imagine if that person turned around and said, I would like to see you without clothes.
Mm.
Plain and simple,
Mm.
right? It is an honest conversation. But no, you're not supposed to say it. No. So you've taught so much of suppression that suppression could also at some point lead to emotional regression.
Yes, I mean, again, we both have had this conversation where we know that even sex education is not something that is done very clearly in the space of autism. In fact, I find it very surprising that everybody is willing to not address it rather than address it. Um, the fact that masking and the opposite of masking, which is reactivity, mostly termed as aggression or violence, and I don't like to use those words, but it's reactivity. I think the reactivity can be caught much more easier. We struggle more with masking because the flags over there are not very clear, and where if a child is being reactive in a way that he is causing harm to either self or to others in the environment, that's flagged quite immediately, and then you know some kind of a format comes into place, and then people start to pay attention. And I sometimes feel that those kids they get the help sooner
Mm.
as opposed to the others.
Suppressed, yeah.
Yes. Do you think, because you spoke about the observation aspect when you are going in uh, to support a child, you said the first thing that you need to do is to observe and to understand um, where is the child, what is the baseline. So do you think that observation is very, very key? But then the truth is that in our systems, whether it be mainstream, inclusive, nowhere I have seen clear behavior tracking done by anybody. I don't see any data inputs that, I mean, there is no system for observation of the child in our
But
education
SK has a
system.
behavior tracker.
Well, that's because I very strongly believe in collecting data. I mean, there are things that you can. I mean, every time when I come to you for modification, if you know, make you sit through pages and pages of my data, and we both talk through it. I'm able to even now, thanks to AI, put it into a space and then understand, okay, where those fluctuations happen, and we are able to collect the triggers, and it's amazing. But we did that. But for whatever reason, observation is not considered important in this space either by the parents.
I wouldn't really agree because, 20 years ago when we were going through the RCI training itself, even if you're sitting with a child for half an hour, I had to record every trial.
But that was on a one-on-one line.
Can
Where
you,
is the
can you
process?
imagine recording in a trial while you're trying to do PICS where there's a picture exchange system, plus the child is having behaviors with sitting and basic sitting tolerance is not there, and I'm trying to do that, plus I'm recording gudu gudu, like, if there's a will, there's a way. Right now, you can just switch on your phone and record everything. It's all possible.
Right.
Unless you sit down and observe, it's not going to happen. Yes, having a recording system, you're infringing on privacy, this, that's all a different story. But I'm saying you need to be connected with your child, you need to observe. Otherwise, you will not catch any of it. Plus, I think the fact that you brought about, sex education or whatever, I find having this conversation with a lot of teen moms, and then they're like, no, he's okay. He's in his space. Um, I don't know whether I'm a very strong believer of the fact that the physiological needs need to be catered to. You are not starving your child of food. You are not giving your child water, right? So his or her hormones are raging. What is the story behind that? But no, he'll manage. Why should he manage? And tomorrow he or she has some frustration because of all this, then don't turn around and say, hey, there's a problem, or there's something goes wrong, like they hurt themselves because they are not, people don't talk about it at all, about self-indulgence or whatever. So what is this I mean, I'm just saying there's so many taboos that we have within our own neurotypical drama. Now you've enforced all those taboos on the neurodivergent community, and then you're telling them to come clean and talk to you and share their experience, but not call someone fatty. You're sending mixed signals throughout.
Correct.
So I think it's a bit unfair if you ask me. However, having said that, I think it's important to be clued in and observe and understand. I will know, as a dog mom, you and I know that we will track our dog's poop on a regular basis.
Correct.
Right? You and I are not on the phone when we take our dogs for a walk.
No.
Yeah. There are people who take their dogs for a walk on the phone. There are people who do not check the poop. There are, because there's a dog walker, someone else is taking the dog for a walk. So I'm just saying, I'm more clued in. There's no good or bad way of parenting.
Correct.
But I know that, my older fellow has more chances of falling sick, and hence I will be more clued in.
So does mine, yeah.
So that's it. That's just the way. So because I know my older fellow is more vulnerable, I will take all the care, precautions, be more observant than my younger fellow. I'm not saying I walk with the phone even with my younger fellow. That he will not allow me because he will be pulling like a mad person. But I'm just saying that because I know that it is required of me, I will do it. Hence, of a neurodivergent parent, it is required that you are clued in, that you are observant, that you are checking in. Unfortunately, that is the truth. That's all.
Much more, because we do know the close connection in between how neurodivergence can very easily fall into the mental illness spaces and what are the different complications that come with it. So can we wrap this session up by saying that social emotional regression does happen? Definitely. Because it happens over a period of time doesn't mean that it is invisible. If it is invisible, we have to find ways to make it visible in the ways that we have spoken. And hopefully help the child get the support before they break.
It's too late.
Mm.
Yeah. So that's why I said keep checking in and make sure that your child is fine, is okay, is comfortable. A slight discomfort can raise a red flag, a slight change in behavior. Look out for those things. And I think that you should be able to kind of mitigate this to a large extent.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. See you in our next episode. Do subscribe and watch the Sense Kaleidoscope Autism podcast.